Good evening and welcome to today's session. As no one has joined yet, no learners have joined yet, so I think I'll wait for 5 more minutes to see if some learners join and then I'll start today's session. It is 5 minutes now. I see one learner has joined, so I think I can start today's session. So, welcome to today's live session for the subject strategies for sustainable design. Today we will be doing assignment 9 for week 9. So, this will be assignment from the previous runs, not the current assigned assignment. So, this week these are the lectures which you would have covered so far. You would have covered vernacular design case examples, so you would have seen several case examples of vernacular design, how it is incorporated in real life buildings, how different architects have practiced it, how traditionally it has been practiced, and things like that. Then you would have studied about climate responsiveness, so how your design can be climate responsive, how you can design your buildings to be suitable for a particular climate, and uh, build it in a way that it is uh, it not only suits the need of the user for that particular climate, but is even less energy intensive. Then you would have studied thinking the unthinkable, and which covers the need for innovation in design process, how to think, how design thinking can be influenced to incorporate innovation in design. And then designing for net zero energy, lighting, ventilation, views, and for human comfort. These are the lectures that you will have covered this week. So the question which we'll discuss today is this. So this is the subjective question which was assigned in the previous run of week 9 for this subject. So it is different from the one which is assigned to you this week, but it is a very good example of how a subjective question can be assigned to you maybe in the next run, or maybe in your exam. So I hope this helps you get an idea of how subjective questions can be assigned to you and how to solve them. So this is a question which asks you to explain the characteristic features of the vernacular architecture of your region. It also asks you to make some sketches of important characteristics or features or details of that particular architectural style. And the keywords which you'll follow to solve this question is vernacular architecture, low cost housing, and local materials. Okay, so first let's start with a little bit of a definition, or what vernacular architecture is. So, vernacular architecture, it basically can be understood to be a region's indigenous local building customs, the region's materiality, and the milieu in which that particular architecture style arises. So, it is architecture that follows a design which is based on the local needs, availability of the construction materials in that particular area, and it reflects the local traditions of the people who are practicing that particular architectural styles. So it has been widely understood as the architectural language of the people, or it expresses the ethnic, regional, and local dialects, and it is the product of non-experts. So traditionally, if you see vernacular architecture, the people who are practicing that particular architectural style, they are actually non-experts. They are not specifically trained uh, or expertly trained in the practice of building design or building construction. However, they are practicing that particular area's architectural design and building style. So it can be considered, vernacular architecture can be considered as to pertain to the buildings from our rural past, and the buildings that are associated with the identity of a certain place, and also to the people who built those structures and who live in them. So it can be associated with traditional buildings that are or were the authentic product of a specific place and belonging to a specific people, and it might have evolved in form over time, and but these are actually produced by non-expert or ordinary people through shared knowledge, which is passed over time from people to people. But recently, even in contemporary practice involves a lot of expert design or buildings designed by experts who have learned and are trained in designing and construction. But even the contemporary architects who are experts in their field, they also follow vernacular architectural practices and building techniques. So even some of the current building designs and building construction, they can be considered examples of vernacular architecture. The catch is that uh, whatever the architectural style the architect is following, it has to belong to a style of a certain region, and it has to incorporate uh, the traditional construction techniques, the building materials, and even the certain design elements which are incorporated in that design for it to be called of a particular vernacular style. So here are three examples which I think might help you understand better what I'm saying. You have three examples of three buildings in front of you. So I hope you can identify all three of them. I'd like to ask from the learners if you can guess which one of these buildings is not an example of vernacular architecture. I'm seeing Aanchal and Garima. Uh, can you guess which one of these buildings is not an example of vernacular architecture? You can just type in your chat box and indicate. Okay, very good. Both of you guessed the correct answer, which is A. So A, can you guess which building it is? Yes, it's the Burj Khalifa. Uh, if I if I tell you that C, even building C is not an example of vernacular architecture, would I be correct or incorrect? Anyone can just type in their chat box and indicate. If I say that building C is not an example of vernacular architecture, would I be correct or incorrect? Garima is saying correct. Achal is also saying correct. Does anyone else have any other input? Anand? Okay, Anand is not responding, so I'll just move further. So I'll not be entirely correct if I call that C is a vernacular architecture or vernacular building. But C definitely has elements of vernacular architecture in it. So C is a building for Indian Coffee House, which is designed by Laurie Baker, and you might know that Laurie Baker is a famous architect who is known for incorporating vernacular architectural elements into his building design. So he sources all his materials which are locally available. He focuses on low cost construction. He focuses on construction styles and practices which are adopted from the area in which he practices, which is the southern part of India. And he focuses on uh, designing a building in a way that the building is climate responsive. So he's basically following all the principles which are part of vernacular architecture. The only way in which his building is slightly not following the vernacular architectural practices is the traditions. So it is not following the traditional forms of construction or design, or the way in which the buildings are designed. So he has borrowed from vernacular practices and made his buildings borrowing from the vernacular architectural styles. So it is an example of vernacular architecture, but not it can't be identified as vernacular architecture of one area or one region. So I hope it is clear. B is a courtyard house belonging to uh, in the in Himachal, to the hilly areas of Himachal. So that is a architect that is example of a building which follows the local vernacular architectural styles and practices of the particular area. It is constructed by the people who are non-experts, and it is constructed according to the specific architectural style or the design that the people are following. And if you see A is not fitting any of the vernacular architecture constraints, as it is not using the locally sourced material, not following the climatic constraints while the building design is being made, not following the particular construction styles or techniques or methods of locals. It is constructed by highly trained experts in their specific engineering fields, and that is why A is definitely not an example of vernacular architecture. So B and C both can be considered examples of vernacular architecture, but in their own sense. So B is a vernacular building which belongs to a particular area, particular region, following a specific uh, architectural style. So it can be termed as a vernacular building of belonging to one particular region. C also follows vernacular design elements, borrows from vernacular architectural practice, but it can't be termed as a building belonging to one specific region or to one specific group of people. So two things I mentioned here. One is the region and another is the people. So if you see this building, this is a bungalow in Mount Abbott, and this is the Anglican church there, and this is the Grand House village of Barakot. So Mount Abbott and Barakot, they are areas which are very close by, both lying in the Himachal uh, Himachal region of India. So I'll ask you another question. Do you think both of these are examples of vernacular architecture, or only the grand house of the village is example of vernacular architecture? You can answer. Anchal and Garima. Do you think both these are example of vernacular architecture, or only the grand house is? Okay. Garima is saying only the grand house, while Anchal is saying that both are. So Anchal is correct here. Both of them are examples of vernacular architecture. So again, you need to focus on what I said when I said that vernacular architecture is not only belonging to an area, but it's also belonging to specific group of people who live in that area. So the grand house in this example, it belongs to one specific ethnic group, and the bungalow and the Anglican Church, it belongs to a different ethnic group. So it belongs to the English settlers who came to India and settled there, and they started borrowing from the local architectural practices, and they introduced their own building style and traditional practices into it, but they still used local construction materials. They borrowed from local construction techniques. They made buildings which are climate responsive. So even their buildings are example of vernacular architecture. The only difference is both of the buildings are belonging to two different ethnic groups. So they belong to two different types of people. That is why when you look at them, they might seem that they are not the same building, or they are not both examples of vernacular architecture belonging to the same region. However, the truth is that they are both examples of vernacular architecture belonging to the same region, but belonging to different peoples with different traditions and different beliefs and design techniques. So this is what I want to clarify. So when you see vernacular architecture, it is not just native to a region, it is also native to a specific group of people. So the Latin word vernaculus, from which vernacular architecture origins, it means domestic, native or indigenous. So indigenous or domestic not only to the region but also to the people who build that or who live in that region. So it is a category of architecture based on localized needs and construction materials, and which reflects the local tradition. So you now know three very important components of vernacular architecture. First, that is influenced by local needs. Second, that it is influenced by local construction materials. And third, that it is influenced by local traditions. Thus, it varies not only from area to area, but also from different people living in that area. Also, it cannot be imported from elsewhere. It has to be borrowed from the area in which uh, the particular architectural style originated. So this is a general rundown of whatever we discussed so far, that vernacular architecture lends unique identity to the buildings and spaces and becomes an outlet to showcase the local people's culture. It serves the needs of the locals. It is resource efficient in nature. It is affordable or cost effective in nature. It is climate sensitive. It follows the particular climatic needs and constraints of a particular area. The building techniques which are being used in building or designing the particular building, it is necessary that they are accessible even to the non-experts who are constructing that particular building, and it uses sustainable practices in design and building of the particular building, and it is both people specific and region specific. The building materials are both locally sourced and durable or renewable in nature. So the building material, if you're using some building material which is uh, durable in nature, so it will last a long time, or if the building material is not durable, it has to be renewable in nature, like for example uh, thatch in thatched roofs, or bamboo in bamboo construction, or other type of things which are easily renewable. So once, if it's not durable, if it decays over time, it can be easily renewed several times over. Then the building needs to have climate sensitivity. It needs to be climate responsive, have suit specific climate of the particular area in which it is located. It also needs to have natural hazard sensitivity. So this is another thing which we often forget while we are studying vernacular architecture, that not only the architecture is climate sensitive, but it is also natural hazard sensitive. So if you see building construction in seismic zones or area with high seismic activity, the buildings are often designed uh, keeping in mind that the design is uh, sensitive to seismic activity, or it's not the building doesn't collapse easily when there is a small seismic activity or tremors. And if it is located in an area which is flooded very regularly, or there is a lot of torrential rain or such things, it's often lifted up on stilts in order to ensure that the building is responsive to the natural hazard which frequently occurs in that area. So things like that also need to be kept in mind while we are practicing vernacular architecture. And the last is that it reflects the socio-cultural context of the area and the people. So this is a rundown of what vernacular architecture basically is. Now we come back to our question. So our question is, explain the characteristic features of vernacular architecture of your region. And you have to do that making some sketches of important characteristics, features and details. So here I will explain to you the vernacular architecture of Kerala as an example, which you can take and emulate further to explain the characteristic features of your vernacular architecture of your own region. Okay, so this these three things we already know, that architecture is vernacular architecture is style that is based on local needs, availability of local construction materials, and it reflecting local tradition. So, what we see in vernacular architecture of Kerala, when we see reflecting local traditions or how traditionally the houses are built, that it is often the architecture, it follows the doctrine of Vastu Shastra. So, Vastu Shastra, as many of you might know, it means it's derived from the Sanskrit word Vastu, which means a dwelling or house, which is corresponding to a plot of land, and the designs are made based on directional alignments of that particular plot. So the doctrine is concerned primarily with building houses, forts, temples, apartments, and other buildings. Uh, Recently, in India specifically, we are seeing the use of this doctrine in construction of uh, modern buildings as well. But traditionally, the vernacular architecture of Kerala follows the Vastu Shastra, and the plot or the building design or the orientation of the building is decided based on these particular uh, blocks, in which uh, how the Vastu Shastra directs uh, you to orient or design your building. So there are several types of houses which fall under this vernacular architecture. So there are single houses which are called sala, and then there are extension of single houses. Then there are multiple single houses which are connected with thoroughfares, and then based on their shape or orientation, they are given different names. So an example is that this is one example. So this is example of a house that faces south, and it has extension from the eastern and western edges. So it becomes a house with three parts, and it's called chuli. Then if the extension is made from both ends of the house, and the house is facing north, the plant typology is called Hiranyavi, which is depicted here. If two separate shalas exist, so shala, as I mentioned earlier, it is a single house. So if there are two separate shalas, and one is at south, another is at north, and if they are joined by long thoroughfare, such residence is called a kanjam. If there are four structures, and all the fours are joined uh, through thoroughfares or in some other way to make one house, it is called an allocative. So if you see four different single houses, if they are joined together, you can imagine that it will be something like a courtyard house. So basically the traditional courtyard houses which exist in vernacular Kerala architecture, they are called as an allocative. So this is a typical plan for an allocative residence. As you can see here, if you consider this as one shala, this as another, this as another, and this as the fourth one, and you consider them connected with a thoroughfare, so this is example of a allocative residence. And this area, which is the courtyard, it might be open to sky, and in some cases it might be even covered. So these are the examples of traditional courtyard houses or Naluketu. And the courtyard houses even have their derivatives. As I mentioned earlier, that even the traditional vernacular architecture or design forms, even they evolve over time. So even they have their derivatives. So for example, Naluketu has two derivatives like Ertuketu or Patinjaruketu or the Great Mansion. So it is a bigger or grander version of the typical Naluketu residence. So you can see how different spaces are arranged. So in the center you'll have open space, you'll have bedrooms over, this is your front porch or entrance, and you'll have bedrooms towards the back. Towards the front you have the kitchen and the dining area and the living room and the puja room, and it will be connected to the entrance and to the open space in the building. So even the spaces and functions have a particular type of orientation and proximity in these type of homes. So the inner zones in the house are private spaces. As we saw here, the bedrooms are located towards the interior of the house or towards the end. Usually each compartmented room of the hall is of small size, and it's a rectangular space and is usually a minimum of 3 meter into 2 meter. The outer zone usually has a porch and a sitting platform, and the house also usually has a 2 meter wide veranda, as you can see here in plan, or even in this you can see the house is surrounded by a 2 meter wide veranda all over. Uh, this type of house in the vernacular architectural practice, it demonstrates the significance of spatial openness and how it is modifiable for various functions. The courtyard in these houses, it serves as the focal point of interaction between the family and other household activities, as it is a central open area which is connected to almost all the rooms and spaces in the building. And both internal and external veranda in the building, it acts as protection from rain and sun. So there is a barrier between the inner walls and the exterior of the building, and you'll have roofs which with awnings or eaves that cover the veranda also. So you'll have a barrier uh, between direct heat gain on the external walls in the building, and when the external walls are protected from the direct heat gain, you'll have the need of minimum cooling in the inner spaces. Because of the open courtyard and the way the roofs are designed, also movement of fresh air and the openness of design also encourages the movement of fresh air in the building, and thus, as Kerala is a hot and humid area, or it has a hot and humid climate, this type of building and construction and design techniques become climate responsive for that particular area. Now you can see the building materials that are used in these type of construction. So the common building material used for vernacular construction in Kerala is mud, laterite, and granite stone blocks. Then they use mud and lime mortar. Then they use wood and bamboo for structural support. They use clay or terracotta roofing tiles, and they even use coconut and palm leaf in their construction. Laterite is a common building material which is used in Kerala. It is dressed for building the walls, and it improves the strength of the building as it is exposed to the sun and moisture over time. Timber like rosewood, bamboo, and teak are also used in construction of these buildings, and all these materials are locally available, and thus they have a low embodied energy. Thus, they have low embodied energy, and due to its minimum energy that is used in transportation. I think you might remember the concept of embodied energy, which we studied pertaining to different construction materials. So the longer or the farther away a construction material is, and the longer you take to transport it, the farther it has to come, the more energy is required in transporting that material. So the embodied energy, or the energy required to obtain and use a specific building material, increases. But because all of the vernacular building materials which are used in these type of structures, they are locally available, they are locally sourced, the embodied energy of these building materials is very low. So mud and lime mortar are used for plastering in these buildings. The exposed laterite bricks also, they are dressed in a way that they still have a rough surface. It's not smooth all the way through. Uh, and these are used for external walls, as these have self-shading properties because of the rough surface of the brick or the blocks. The red oxide flooring is used for interiors, and unfinished granite stone flooring is used for exteriors. And the roughness of these, none of these are highly polished or made very reflective, and this is because the roughness of the stone reduces reflectivity, and thus it reduces glare and transfer of solar heat or uh, such things in the building. Then palm leaves, as I mentioned, are a common building material which is used. They are used effectively for thatching roofs and making partition walls, and even they are used for composite construction. They're mixed with mud and other materials to either make walls or partition walls or other composite construction. Timber also remains prime structural material as it is abundantly available in Kerala, and it includes varieties like bamboo, teak, and rosewood. Even delicate carving of wood and common columns and walls and roof frames are present in many of the buildings, and they are part of the unique characteristics of the culture or tradition of the people who construct. Then you can even describe the roof system or the roofing system of your particular building if it is of some interest. So, for example, in case of this type of buildings, high pitched roofs and large roof overhangs are common, and they are used to maximize pressure difference in order to maximize airflow. So you might have seen stack effect in previous lectures. I described stack effect, that how pressure difference and uh, cool temperature difference in cool air and hot air causes airflow to happen in such type of roofing systems and buildings. So because of that, such roofs are used. The high pitched roof is provided with a roof beneath it, creating a larger airspace and that airspace acts as an attic, providing an insulating layer again, and preventing conduction of external heat through the roof. So this airspace is provided with openings also, as you can see here, that this airspace also has openings, which creates an escape route for hot air to rise and then get transferred through the tilted roof. And these steep roofs and deep eaves, these also help in flowing or runoff of rainwater quickly, as Kerala also experiences heavy rains. Then you can even describe the particular type and style of fenestrations in your building. So in typical Nalukettu homes, cross ventilation is important because Kerala lies in humid climate zone. So cross ventilation is enhanced by providing a specific type of fenestration on and these fenestrations are provided focusing on even the orientation of the room. So they will be provided on opposite walls in order to maximize the airflow, in order to cover the largest area in the room possible which has airflow. Different types of fenestrations are provided, ranging from two pane casement windows to even wooden jalis in these buildings. Wooden jalis are meticulously cut and arranged, not only to reflect the local craftsmanship and traditional architectural style of the area, but also to cut off the glare and bring in diffused light inside the building, and also to improve air movement through the building. Both side and top lighting are used in the buildings to bring in daylight, and fenestrations are typically placed on the northern facade of the building so that you don't have a lot of direct sunlight, but you have more of indirect diffused sunlight. Shading devices are used both on the windows and walls, and these are used to cut down the solar heat gain, as we just saw in the case of the awnings on the verandas. The eaves of the roof are projected to act as a shading device for the walls if the verandas are not provided. So this is all for this particular architectural style. I've also given you a link to Laurie Baker's website. If you just click through to that link, this is Laurie Baker's website. So you can read about how Laurie Baker incorporated the vernacular architectural styles and practices into his architectural design. So if you see, these are the basic principles which Baker followed. Okay, so you can see here, it is a set of different beliefs and principles which Laurie Baker followed, and you can see it is based on or borrows a lot from the vernacular architecture practices which he used in his design. So things like discouraging extravagance and strawberry, and believing in a reasonable brief, so sticking to only the needs. So as we saw that vernacular architecture, it reflects the needs and requirements of a particular area. So when you discourage extravagance and snobbery, and you follow a reasonable design, you are essentially incorporating the needs of the particular user for which your building is being designed. Then always study your site, the soil, topography, water, climate, and neighborhoods. So if it's a noisy area, does it have smelly factories, etc. So again, focusing on the local area, what are the needs, what is the kind of soil, the topography, the climate, all such things. Then things like seeing potential services, how the water drainage, etc. will be taken care of. Then focusing on the accurate details of the site. Uh, then he talks about uniqueness. So it is not something which is directly related to vernacular, but then you can see how even after borrowing from vernacular architecture, all of his buildings are unique, because this is another principle which he follows in his design. Then study and know local materials. So again, vernacular architecture follows the study and use of local materials. So another thing which he focuses on. Then study and know energy. So energy efficiency and low embodied energy of the materials and things like that. Again, following on the principle of vernacular design, things like that. So you can go through these. You can even see his different architectural works, what all he designed. And if you want to go into details, you can even find resources online, seeing, and you can see how he incorporated uh, his beliefs of vernacular architecture and elements of vernacular architecture in his building. So I have provided this link. I hope this is helpful to you. So, Laurie Baker is one example of an architect who borrows from vernacular architecture and uses that in contemporary architectural practice. I have another example to show to you. So, when you describe architecture of your area or your region, you can even mention architects, contemporary architects who have borrowed from the local vernacular architecture of your area, and you can describe their work, how they have borrowed the local architectural practices and how they have incorporated in their works, what are the elements they have retained, what are the materials they are using, and things like that. So one, Laurie Baker is one example. Another example which I'll share with you, this is an example different from Kerala's vernacular architecture. So this is the architecture of Indian or Himalayan hilly areas. So this is the contractor who is an architect. Uh, Self-taught architect essentially, who practices architecture following the vernacular building techniques and using the local or locally sourced materials from the hilly areas of India. So she is based in Dharamshala, and she practices architecture in the areas surrounding. She has designed and built more than 15 houses in and around Dharamshala, and many of those buildings are even institutional buildings. So it is not just residential buildings, but even institutional buildings. These are some of the buildings which she has constructed. So there is a health center, health education and environment center in Dharamshala. Then there are campuses for institutes like Dharmalaya Institute for Compassionate Living. Then there are even administrative buildings like this Institute for Public Policy and Politics. So what she does is that she uses building materials and construction techniques which are local in nature. So like you can see this, this is the slate processing, which is a part of the building materials which she uses. So slate is an important or common building material which is used in both roofs, construction of roofs and walls of that area. And then you can see this is a stone collection from the river nearby. So stone is collected from several seasonal rivers in and around that area, and then this stone is also used for construction in the construction of the contractors buildings. So these are the examples in which shows you how different in different ways she has used the local materials or the specifically stone, as we saw. So you can see the local stone is used in to create load bearing walls, and as you can see here, the slate is used for roofing. The stone is also used to create interesting facades in the building. It is also used for creating retaining walls like this for landscaping purposes. Then stone, she even uses stones and mixes with concrete to create structures like this. So always contemporary architects, they borrow from the local techniques, but then they use sometimes use composite building techniques. Like here she has mixed stone with concrete to create an open air theater. This is not possible just following the local construction techniques and materials. That is why wherever needed, she has used composite building and construction techniques. Then she has created patterned pavings using the stone to create interesting patterns on pavings in the landscaped areas. And then for steps, also she has used the river combination of the river stones and the slate. Then even to create boundary walls and things like that. And not only the material is local, but even the craftsmanship which is used to build these elements of the buildings are also local. Another important material which uses is the locally sourced mud. So the mud is dried or made in the form of sun-dried mud bricks, and these mud bricks are then used for creating these walls, as you can see here. So you can see that mud is being sourced right from the site and then it is going to the building. So imagine how much low this building material is in terms of embodied energy, as it is being sourced right from the site. It does not have to travel over a large distance. It does not have to be sourced from any area which is farther away from the site. It is also being used to plaster the floors, as you can see here, and even the walls. So locally sourced mud is being used for different things. Uh, However, if you want to create buildings which have larger lifespan or longer durability, often architects or practitioners experiment different techniques, bring in different materials, bring in composite building techniques, which is not only vernacular but even mix of newer building materials or building techniques in order to make the buildings more interesting, have more functions, and even be more durable. So, for example, the contractor here, she experimented with different proportions of shredded waste paper and cow dung and adhesive mixtures for creating wall plasters by mixing them with mud. Because these hybrid plasters, they weather slower as compared to just mud plaster, uh, which is the traditional way of plastering the building. So it is borrowing from the traditional techniques, but uh, changing and evolving in such a way that minimum new techniques have to be used to create the buildings. Even you see, as I mentioned, an important aspect of the contractor's construction is that she creates not only the traditional buildings, like traditionally the practices she uses are used to create small spaces for residences and not for very large spaces. But while the contractor is also constructing larger buildings, so institutional buildings or things like that. So these buildings need larger spaces for congregation or for larger activities. So they need larger areas. So in order to have larger areas, you need large spanning spaces with large windows, having large window frames and things like that. So in many cases, she uses RCC as well. Uh, so that lintel bands can be created, so that a masonry load is distributed accordingly, as such large spanning spaces are not possible to be constructed with just the locally sourced material. So she follows a type of practice which borrows from the local vernacular architecture as much as possible, but it is not naive in a way that it uses even the composite techniques in places where it is required and cannot be done without materials or techniques from the modern architecture practices. So that is all about Titi Contractors building. So that is example of architecture of Indian Himalayan areas or Himalayan vernacular architecture, which is adopted by a contemporary architect and then molded by her in her own style. If you want to know a little bit about the traditional Himalayan vernacular architectural styles, this is one construction style which I discussed earlier also in our lectures, which is the Katkuni construction style. So I hope that you remember that also. So I have again in this session as well attached the links of all the sources you can refer to if you want to learn more about this architectural style. So if you want to, if you belong to an area with this type of architectural style, you can cover this as well. So, and if you want more resources, all the resources are linked here and you can get to them at your own time. I hope it was clear and it was helpful, and I hope it helped you understand what you need to write when you are presented with a subjective question which asks you to describe the vernacular architectural style of your area and to provide details about the different material, construction style, construction techniques, etc. I hope it has helped you. Thank you very much for attending today's session. I'll take any questions if there are any questions. I'm seeing someone has raised hand. Please just type your question in the chat box. You can just type your question in the chat box and I can get to it. Anyone else? If anyone else has a question, please type your question. Okay. Mr. Rao is asking, is this Vastu followed in Kerala same throughout the country or variation if any? I am not sure if the Vastu Shastra practice followed is the same or there is a variation, as I'm not a subject expert on Vastu Shastra. I can check and get to you in the next session. But Vastu Shastra is basically a doctrine which is practiced in several parts of India, and I think it basically follows in which direction and orientation, what spaces in a house should be oriented, and things like that. So that is the basic context or pretext on which the buildings are designed and oriented. However, I can check if I can find more information on this. So I am not sure if it varies from place to place in India, but I can check and get back to you. Thank you for your question. That is a very interesting question. Is there anyone else, or are there any more questions? Uh, He's also asking, can Vastu followed habitat can called as vernacular architecture in real sense? Okay, so as I mentioned in our session earlier, that to qualify as being a vernacular architecture, the building has to have several components. So it has to have these components, that it should have local identity, specific and unique to a specific region, specific area. It should serve the needs of the local people or the people who reside in that area. It should be resource efficient, affordable. It should be climate sensitive. The building techniques which are involved in building that particular building, it should be accessible both to the uh, experts in the construction field, and also to the non-experts. So it should be even a layman should be able to design and construct the specific type of building, and it should use sustainable practices. It should be climate sensitive for the particular climate in that region. It should be sensitive to the local natural hazards, and it should reflect the socio-cultural context. And the materials that are used in the building, they should be locally sourced, or they should be durable and renewable in nature. So these are all the components of vernacular architecture which a building needs to have in order for that building to be called an example of vernacular building. So, while Vastu Shastra is a part of the traditional construction techniques, or it follows specific socio-cultural context of an area or the beliefs of that people, only having Vastu sensitivity or only following Vastu principles does not make a building eligible to be called a vernacular architecture. It has to have several different other components uh, to it. It should follow several other guidelines and principles for it to be called a building uh, of building for it to be called a vernacular building, or a building having vernacular architectural style. So I hope that is clear that only following Vastu does not make a building vernacular. There are several other components which have to be followed, several other principles which have to be followed in the design and practice and construction of the building in order for the building to be called a vernacular building. I hope it is clear. Any more questions? Sagar has said no more questions. Anand and Arvind, I see, are still here. Do you have any more questions? Okay, Anand also doesn't have any questions. Arvind, do you have any questions? If you have any questions, please type in the chat box. Okay, Arvind also doesn't have any questions. So I think that is for that is it for today's session. We will close the session. Thank you very much all for attending today's session, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.